The moon was called Kessa 9, a gray and frozen rock that circled a dead gas giant at the edge of a system nobody wanted. For 300 years it had been empty, forgotten, and cold. Then the Dravith scout ship Sorrow's Edge found the wreck buried under a kilometer of ice, and everything changed. Captain Renata Cole was the first human to see it with her own eyes, though by then, the news had already spread across half the galaxy. She stood in the observation dome of her survey ship, the Wandering Star, and looked down at the massive shape locked in the ice below. It was long, dark, and broken in places, but even from orbit, she could tell it was enormous. Bigger than any ship she had ever seen built by human hands. Bigger even than the newest Dravith battlecruisers that patrolled this border. "Confirm the readings," she said quietly to her science officer, a thin, nervous man named Julian Farrow. Julian tapped at his console, and the numbers scrolled past his eyes twice before he trusted them. "Captain, this hull is old, really old. The metal signature doesn't match anything in the current registry. Whatever this is, it predates the Sol Compact. It might even predate the founding of Earth's first colonies beyond Mars." Renata frowned. "That's not possible. Humanity didn't have ships like this 300 years ago. We could barely leave the solar system." "I know," Julian said. "But the ice core samples don't lie. This thing has been sitting here since before we ever met another intelligent species. Before the Dravith, before the Asuran, before any of it." Renata felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Humanity's official history began with slow, careful steps into the stars, guided cautiously by treaties and trade agreements with older, more powerful civilizations. The idea that an ancient human warship, something that looked like a weapon of war, not a colony transport, had been buried on this frozen moon, long before any of that made no sense at all. Unless the official history was wrong. She didn't have long to think about it, because the comm channel chimed with an incoming transmission. It was Dravith, their harsh clicking language, automatically translated into Renata's earpiece a half-second after they spoke. "Human vessel Wandering Star, this is High Marshal Vren Thessarian, of the Dravith Hegemony Fleet. You are trespassing in a salvage zone claimed by the Varen Concord. Withdraw immediately." Renata straightened her spine before she answered. The Dravith were proud, tall, reptilian warriors who had never hidden their disdain for humanity. To them, humans were newcomers, weak and soft, barely worth noticing except as a source of amusement or minor irritation. The Varen Concord, the alliance of older species that ruled most of known space, tolerated humans the way one might tolerate a stray animal that had wandered too close to a campfire. "High Marshal," Renata said, keeping her voice level. "This system falls under the Joint Exploration Treaty signed by the Sol Compact and the Concord 5 years ago. We have every right to be here, and that wreck below us was built by humans. It belongs to us." There was a pause, and then laughter, actual laughter, translated crudely into her ear, harsh and mocking. "That pile of rusted metal? Impossible. Your species did not exist as a spacefaring people 300 years ago. You were still burning fossil fuels and fighting each other over borders on your homeworld. This is Concord territory, and that wreck, whatever it is, belongs to whoever claims it first. We are already sending a recovery team." Renata's jaw tightened. She looked down at Julian, who was watching her with wide eyes, clearly waiting to see what she would do. She thought of every insult humanity had swallowed since first contact. The way the older species spoke to human diplomats like children. The way human ships were given the worst docking bays, the slowest trade routes, the least respect in every council meeting. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in the colonial skirmishes back when Earth's fleet had been nothing but a few dozen patched-together cruisers, facing pirates and worse with courage but almost no real firepower. And she thought about the massive, dark shape buried in the ice below her ship. A shape built by human hands, somehow, long before anyone believed it was possible. "Send the recovery team if you like," Renata said. "But you'll be doing it under the watch of a Sol Compact vessel, and any attempt to seize that wreck by force will be considered an act of war under the treaty. I suggest you check with your superiors before you do something you can't take back." The channel went silent for a long moment. Then Vren Thessarian spoke again, his voice dropping into something colder and more dangerous. "You dare threaten a hegemony fleet with your single unarmed survey ship? You are a fool, Captain, but very well. We will follow the treaty, for now. Do not think this ends here. The channel closed. Renata let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was either very brave or very stupid, Julian said. Ask me again after we see what's actually down there, Renata replied. It took 11 days for the joint recovery operation to properly begin, with human engineers from the Sol Compact working alongside a reluctant and openly contemptuous team of Draveth technicians. Renata used every diplomatic channel she had to make sure human personnel were present at every stage, and eventually Command back on Earth sent reinforcements, 2 more ships, a proper excavation crew, and a name that made Renata's heart skip when she heard it over the secure channel. Admiral Josiah Okafor, one of the most respected officers in the Sol Compact fleet, was coming to Kessa 9 personally. They wouldn't send an admiral for a routine salvage job, Julian said, as they watched the excavation lights slowly clear away centuries of ice from the buried hull. No, Renata agreed. They wouldn't. She soon learned why. Deep in a data archive that had been sealed since before the founding of the Sol Compact, historians had found fragments of records referring to something called the Ash Wars, a period of human history that had been quietly erased from most textbooks. According to these fragments, in the earliest days of humanity's expansion beyond the solar system, there had been a conflict so brutal, so nearly extinction level, that the survivors had made a deliberate choice to bury it, to hide the weapons they had built to survive, and to start over with a story of humble, peaceful expansion. The ship in the ice was one of those weapons, a relic of a war humanity had fought alone, against enemies now lost to history, using technology that had apparently been so far beyond anything the current Sol Compact possessed that nobody quite understood how it had been built. Admiral Okafor arrived on the 14th day, and Renata stood at attention on the docking platform of her ship as his shuttle descended. He was an older man, gray at the temples, with the calm, patient bearing of someone who had commanded through worse crises than this one. Captain Cole, he said, shaking her hand firmly, I read your report. Good work holding your ground against the Draveth. Thank you, sir. Can I ask what exactly we're dealing with here? Okafor's expression grew serious. Walk with me. They took a shuttle down to the excavation site together, where the massive hull was now almost fully exposed, rising out of the ice like the skeleton of some ancient sea creature. Up close, the scale of it was staggering. It dwarfed even the largest Draveth dreadnoughts patrolling nearby, a monument of dark metal, etched with symbols that no living linguist could fully translate, though the letters were unmistakably an early form of English. Her name, as best our historians can piece together, is the Gravekeeper, Okafor said, his voice quiet, with something like reverence. Built during the last years of the Ash Wars, when humanity faced an enemy that nearly wiped us out entirely. We don't know who that enemy was. The records were destroyed, deliberately, by the survivors. But we know the Gravekeeper was built as a last resort, a weapon meant to end that war, whatever the cost. Did it work? Renata asked. The war ended, Okafor said. That's all the records confirm. And after it ended, someone made the choice to hide this ship, seal it, and bury the truth. For 300 years, we forgot what we were capable of. Renata looked up at the towering hull, feeling very small. And now the Draveth want to take it. Now the Draveth want to take it. Okafor agreed. And they will keep pushing, because they still believe humanity is weak. That's why I'm here, Captain. Command wants this ship recovered, repaired, and crewed. By humans, for humans. And I want you as part of that crew. Renata blinked, surprised. Me, sir? You stood your ground against a hegemony fleet, with nothing but a survey ship and a treaty document, Okafor said, a faint smile crossing his face. I think you're exactly the kind of officer this ship needs. She looked back at the Gravekeeper, its dark hull catching the pale light of the distant sun, ancient and silent and full of secrets. Somewhere out among the stars, the Draveth hegemony and the rest of the Varen Concord were watching, laughing at the idea that a relic from humanity's forgotten past could mean anything at all. They had no idea what they were looking at. Tensions in the wider galaxy were already rising before the Gravekeeper was even fully excavated. For years, disputes over resource-rich systems along the border between Sol Compact territory and Concord space had been simmering, small skirmishes here and there, trade routes contested, diplomatic insults exchanged in council chambers. Many analysts, both human and alien, believed a larger conflict was inevitable. The Concord species, proud, ancient, and used to dominating every newcomer they encountered, had grown increasingly impatient with humanity's refusal to simply accept a lesser place in galactic society. The discovery of the Gravekeeper threw fuel on a fire that was already burning. Word spread quickly through Concord space. The humans had found some old, broken relic and were treating it like a treasure. Dravith warriors mocked it openly in diplomatic channels, calling it a rusted coffin, a museum piece unworthy of the ice it had been buried in. Osseran analysts, cold and logical, calculated that even fully repaired, the ship's outdated technology could pose no meaningful threat to any modern Concord vessel. The insectoid Mer diplomats simply found the whole affair amusing, a curious footnote in humanity's long history of overestimating itself. Renata heard all of this secondhand, filtered through official reports and intercepted communications, and it made her angry in a way she hadn't expected. She had grown used to alien condescension over the years. It was simply part of being human, in a galaxy dominated by older, more established species. But something about the mockery aimed at the Gravekeeper felt different. Personal, almost. As if the ship itself, silent and buried for 3 centuries, deserved better than to be laughed at by people who had never once faced what its makers had faced. She threw herself into the recovery effort with everything she had. Command assigned her as the ship's provisional captain, pending a full evaluation of the vessel's systems, and gave her a crew of volunteers pulled from across the Sol compact fleet. Engineers, technicians, soldiers, scientists, all hand-picked for the task of bringing a 300-year-old warship back to life. Chief among them was Tomas Reyes, a broad-shouldered engineer with calloused hands and an easy smile, who had spent the last 20 years working on some of the oldest human ships still in service. If anyone could understand ancient technology, Command believed, it was Tomas. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," Tomas told Renata on their first full walkthrough of the ship's interior, 3 weeks after the excavation was complete. They moved carefully through dark corridors, lit only by portable lamps, past frozen consoles and sealed doors that hadn't opened in centuries. The materials, the construction, even the way the systems are laid out, it's advanced, really advanced, more advanced than anything the Concord has, if I'm reading these schematics right. "How is that possible?" Renata asked. "We were barely a spacefaring species 300 years ago." Tomas shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever built this ship knew things we've forgotten, or things we were never taught in the first place." He paused at a heavy, sealed door deep in the ship's core, running his scanner over its surface. "And there's something behind here. Something big. The scanner can't even get a clear reading, like the material itself is blocking it." Renata felt that same chill again, the one she'd felt looking down at the wreck from orbit. "The weapon Okafor mentioned." "Maybe," Tomas said. "Whatever it is, it's sealed tight. We'll need a lot more time before we can even think about opening that door." They didn't get as much time as they wanted. 2 months into the recovery effort, with the Gravekeeper's outer hull repaired and its ancient reactor slowly, carefully brought back online, the first real shots of what would become known as the First Galactic War were fired 3 systems away, in a contested border colony called Halverson's Reach. The Dravith hegemony, tired of waiting, tired of watching humanity dig up relics of a past they didn't believe in, launched a surprise attack on the small human colony, claiming it had always belonged to the Concord and that the treaty allowing human settlement had been a temporary courtesy, now revoked. Renata was standing on the bridge of the half-repaired Gravekeeper when the news came through. Admiral Okafor's voice grim over the comm. "Captain Cole," he said, "Halverson's Reach has fallen. The Dravith hegemony has declared this an act of rightful reclamation, and 3 other Concord species have voiced support. Command believes this is the beginning of a full-scale war." Renata looked around at her crew. Tomas at the engineering station, Julian at sensors, dozens of others working to bring an ancient warship back from the dead, and then out through the viewport, at the massive dark hull of the Gravekeeper stretching out into the void. "How long until she's ready to fight, sir?" Renata asked. There was a long pause. "I don't know, Captain," Okafor said finally. "But I suggest you find out. Because if this war is coming, humanity is going to need every advantage it can get." and that ship might be the only thing we have that they don't. Outside, across 100 systems, the mockery continued. The Concord fleets called the Gravekeeper a joke, a relic, a piece of scrap metal humanity was foolishly clinging to out of desperate pride. They laughed at the idea that anything buried in ice for 300 years could matter in a modern war. They had no idea what was sleeping behind that sealed door in the ship's core, waiting patiently for the day it would finally be needed again. News of the fall of Halvorson's Reach spread through the Sol Compact like a wound that would not close. 3,000 human colonists had lived there, farmers and miners and their families, people who had spent years turning a rocky, unwelcoming world into something like home. The Dravith attack fleet had given them only 6 hours to evacuate, before opening fire on anything left behind. Most had gotten out. Many had not. Renata read the casualty reports twice, then set them aside, and walked the length of the Gravekeeper's bridge, trying to steady her breathing. Around her, the crew worked in near silence, the mood heavy and grim. 2 months ago, this ship had been an archaeological curiosity, a fascinating puzzle from humanity's forgotten past. Now it felt like something else entirely, a responsibility, maybe even a last hope. "Captain," Julian called from the sensor station. "Command is requesting a full status report on repairs. They want to know how close we are to combat readiness." Renata walked over to Tomas, who was buried up to his elbows in an open-access panel, muttering to himself in a mix of frustration and awe as he traced wiring that predated anything in the current fleet's manuals. "Tomas," she said. "The truth. How close are we?" He straightened up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, and considered the question carefully before answering. "The reactor is stable. That's the good news. Whatever alloy they used for the core housing, it barely degraded in 300 years buried in ice. The bad news is that half the ship's systems are still offline, and I don't fully understand how they're supposed to work. This isn't like repairing an old human ship where I already know the design philosophy. This is like trying to fix a language I've never spoken before." "Can she fly? Can she fight?" "She can fly," Tomas said. "Basic maneuvering, life support, short-range weapons. All of that is functional, or close to it. But the big systems, the things that make this ship more than just a really old, really big cruiser, those are still a mystery, including whatever's behind that sealed door." Renata nodded slowly. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was an honest one, and honesty mattered more right now than false comfort. "Send that to command exactly as you said it to me," she told Julian. "No sugarcoating. They need to know what we actually have." The response came back within the hour, carried personally by Admiral Okafor, over a secure video channel, his face tired and lined with worry. "The War Council has voted," he told Renata. "We're mobilizing the fleet. Every available ship is being called to defend the border systems. Command wants the Gravekeeper included in that mobilization, even in her current state." Renata felt her stomach tighten. "Sir, with respect, this ship isn't ready. We don't even understand half of what's on board." "I know," Okafor said, "but the Dravith hegemony isn't waiting for us to be ready, Captain. And frankly, we need every hull we can put in the field, ready or not. The Concord fleets outnumber us badly in this sector. If the Gravekeeper can even serve as a heavily armored escort, a distraction, anything at all, it could save lives." Renata looked past the screen, out through the viewport at the dark hull stretching endlessly around her, ancient and mysterious, and still full of secrets nobody had cracked. "Understood, sir. We'll be ready to deploy within the week." "Good luck, Captain," Okafor said, his expression softening slightly. "And Renata, whatever that ship turns out to be capable of, I have a feeling humanity is going to need it before this war is over." The week that followed was the hardest of Renata's career. Every system that could be brought online was brought online. Every weapon that could be tested was tested, often with results that ranged from disappointing to genuinely frightening, as ancient energy conduits reacted in ways nobody could fully predict. Tomas and his engineering team worked in shifts around the clock, surviving on stims and stubbornness, slowly coaxing more and more of the ship's systems back to life. It was during one of these late-night sessions, 3 days before the Gravekeeper was scheduled to join the fleet, that something changed. Renata was in her quarters, staring at reports she'd already read a dozen times, when her comm chimed with an urgent message from the bridge. "Captain, You need to see this! Julian's voice came through, tight with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Right now! She hurried to the bridge and found the entire night shift crew gathered around the main view screen, staring at something Renata had never seen before. The ship's ancient central console, long, dark, and unresponsive, was glowing faintly, lines of unfamiliar text scrolling across it in slow, deliberate pulses. What is this? Renata asked. We don't know, Tomas said, hurrying onto the bridge himself, still in his engineering coveralls. The core reactor stabilized fully about 20 minutes ago, and this just started happening. It's like something woke up. As if in answer to his words, the text on the console shifted, and a voice, calm, measured, distinctly artificial but somehow warm, spoke through the bridge's speakers for the first time in 300 years. Initialization complete. Core systems online. Command authority required. The entire bridge went silent. Renata stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding. This is Captain Renata Cole, of the Sol compact vessel Gravekeeper. Identify yourself. There was a pause, calculating, almost thoughtful. I am the ship's primary intelligence system, designated Warden. I have been in low-power dormancy for approximately 312 years. Please confirm current date and status of the Ash conflict. Renata exchanged a glance with Tomas before answering carefully. The Ash Wars ended 300 years ago, Warden. We don't have full records of what happened. Most of that history was lost or deliberately erased. Another pause, longer this time. When Warden spoke again, there was something almost like sorrow in its measured tone. That is, unfortunate, but understandable, given the circumstances of the war's conclusion. I possess extensive records of that conflict, Captain, though I am restricted from disclosing certain details without proper command authorization. May I ask what has caused my reactivation after so long? We found this ship buried on a moon called Kessa 9, Renata explained. Humanity has grown since your time, Warden. We've expanded across dozens of systems, but we're not alone out here anymore. We're part of a larger galactic community now, one dominated by species who don't think very highly of us. I see, Warden said. And is that why I have been reactivated? Because humanity requires my assistance once again? Renata hesitated, then decided the AI deserved the truth, whatever the consequences. There's a war starting, Warden. Humanity against an alliance of alien species who believe we're beneath them. We don't fully understand this ship's capabilities yet, but we're hoping you can help us change that. The console's lights pulsed steadily for a long moment, as if the ancient intelligence was considering everything it had just learned. Captain Cole, Warden said finally, this vessel was built during humanity's darkest hour, as a final measure against an enemy that very nearly ended our species entirely. I was designed to serve the humans who crewed this ship, to protect them, and if necessary, to end conflicts that threatened our survival. I will serve that same purpose now, if you will have me. Renata felt something ease in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. We'll have you, Warden. We need all the help we can get. Then I suggest, Warden said, that you begin preparing your crew for what you are about to learn. There is much about this ship, and about the war that built it, that you do not yet understand. Some of it, I fear, you may wish you had never learned at all. Over the following 2 days, Warden proved to be exactly what the Gravekeeper needed. With its guidance, systems that had puzzled Tomas's engineering team for months suddenly made sense. Weapons systems came fully online. Shield generators, more advanced than anything in the current Sol compact fleet, hummed to life for the first time in 3 centuries. Even the ship's ancient sensor array, once barely functional, began returning readings with a clarity and range that left Julian staring at his console in stunned silence. But Warden remained guarded about the sealed door, deep in the ship's core, and about the true nature of the Ash Wars themselves. I am bound by protocols established by my original commanders, Warden explained to Renata during one of their many conversations, this one held privately in her quarters. The weapon behind that door was never meant to be used lightly, Captain. It was built only after every other option had failed, when humanity faced true extinction. I cannot authorize its use, or even fully reveal its nature, unless certain conditions are met. What conditions? Renata asked. A declaration of existential threat to humanity, confirmed by proper command authority, and my own assessment that all other options have been exhausted. Warden said. These protocols were not created carelessly, Captain. The weapon behind that door is capable of ending wars. It is also capable of ending far more than that, if used without sufficient caution. Renata thought about that for a long time after their conversation ended. She thought about Halverson's reach, about the families who hadn't made it out in time, about the Dravith hegemony's open contempt for everything humanity had built. She wondered how bad things would need to get before Warden's conditions were met, and she found herself hoping, quietly, that they never would be. But the galaxy had other plans. 3 days after Warden's reactivation, the Gravekeeper received orders to join the Sol Compact's Third Fleet at a border system called Meridian Station, where intelligence suggested the Dravith hegemony and its Concord allies were massing for a major offensive. Renata gathered her crew in the ship's main hangar bay before departure, standing before them on a raised platform, the massive dark hull of the Gravekeeper stretching out on either side of her like the ribs of some ancient awakening beast. 3 months ago, she began, most of you had never heard of this ship, neither had I. We found her buried in ice, forgotten by history, mocked by every alien fleet that passed within sensor range. They called her a relic, a joke, a rusted coffin not worth the effort of digging up. She paused, letting her eyes move across the assembled crew. Engineers and soldiers, scientists and pilots, humans who had volunteered for a mission most of the galaxy considered a waste of time. They're about to find out how wrong they were, Renata continued. This ship was built by humans, who faced an enemy that nearly wiped us out entirely, and they built something extraordinary to survive it. We don't fully understand everything she's capable of yet, but I promise you this. Every alien commander who's laughed at the Gravekeeper is going to regret it before this war is over. A ragged cheer went up through the hangar bay, and Renata felt something settle in her chest, a quiet, steady resolve that hadn't been there before. Whatever waited for them at Meridian Station, whatever the Dravith hegemony and the rest of the Varen Concord believed about humanity's ancient, forgotten warship, they were about to learn the truth the hard way. As the Gravekeeper pulled away from Kessa 9 and its long frozen grave, sliding smoothly into faster-than-light travel for the first time in 300 years, Warden's voice came through the bridge speakers one final time before the jump. Captain Cole, it said quietly, I have reviewed current Concord fleet strength across this sector. Their forces significantly outnumber the Sol Compact's available ships. I calculate our odds of victory at Meridian Station as unfavorable, based on conventional engagement parameters. Renata stood at the center of the bridge, watching the stars stretch into streaks of light as the ship accelerated toward its first battle in 3 centuries. Then it's a good thing we're not conventional, Warden, she said. Let's show them exactly what they've been laughing at. Behind her, deep in the ship's ancient core, the sealed door remained closed, waiting patiently, as it had waited for 300 years, for the day it would finally be needed. That day was coming faster than any of them realized. Meridian Station was a sprawling collection of habitats and refineries, built around a small, resource-rich moon, home to almost 40,000 human workers and their families. It sat at a crossroads of trade routes, which made it valuable, and it sat close to the border with Concord space, which made it vulnerable. When the Gravekeeper dropped out of faster-than-light travel alongside the rest of the Sol Compact's Third Fleet, the scene waiting for them was already grim. Dravith hegemony warships filled the forward view screens, dozens of them, sleek and predatory, arranged in a formation designed to crush anything foolish enough to stand in their way. Behind them, smaller Ossuran cruisers moved with cold precision, and the insectoid transports of the Mir hovered further back, ready to ferry ground troops down to the station's surface the moment the human fleet was broken. Sensors confirm 43 enemy capital ships, Julian reported, his voice tight. We have 22, including us. On the bridge, Renata studied the tactical display, her jaw set. Admiral Okafor's flagship, the Endeavour, held position at the center of the human formation, broadcasting orders across the fleet's tactical channel. All ships, hold formation. Okafor's voice came through, steady despite the odds. We are not here to win a straight fight. We are here to protect Meridian Station's evacuation and inflict maximum damage on any force that tries to stop us. Gravekeeper, take point on the station's flank. Draw their attention if you can. Renata keyed her comm. Copy that, Endeavour. Gravekeeper, moving into position. As the massive ship began to move, gliding forward with a grace that still surprised the crew who had spent months restoring her. Warden's voice came through the bridge, calm as always. "Captain, I should note that the Dravith flagship has identified us specifically. They appear to be reallocating forces to target this vessel directly." Renata almost laughed. "Good. Let them come." On the enemy flagship, hundreds of kilometers away, High Marshal Vren Thessarian watched the human formation shift and felt something close to satisfaction. He had followed the reports about the ancient relic humanity had dug out of the ice on Kessa 9, and he had dismissed it then as he dismissed it now. An old, broken symbol the humans clung to out of desperate pride, nothing more. "The relic ship is moving to intercept," his tactical officer reported. "Let it," Thessarian said, his reptilian eyes narrowing with something like amusement. "Target that ship first. Let the humans watch their precious ancient warship crumble before the rest of their fleet. It will break their spirit before we break their bodies." The order went out, and a full third of the Dravith formation began peeling away toward the Gravekeeper, weapons charging, closing the distance with the confident aggression of a species that had never truly been tested by humanity before. "Captain, incoming fire in 15 seconds, Julian called out. "Shields at full power," Renata ordered. "Thomas, how are we looking?" "Shield generators are holding steady," Thomas reported from engineering, sweat visible on his brow, despite the ship's climate controls. "Warden's guiding the power distribution. I've never seen anything like this. She's routing energy through pathways I didn't even know existed." The first wave of Dravith fire lit up the void, dozens of energy weapons converging on the Gravekeeper's hull. Renata braced herself, expecting the ship to shudder under the impact, the way every human ship she'd ever served on would have. Instead, the Gravekeeper's shields flared brilliantly, absorbing the barrage with barely a tremor through the deck plating. "Shields at 96%, Julian reported, disbelief evident in his voice. "Captain, that should have taken us down to 60 at least." "Warden," Renata said, "status report. Shield technology aboard this vessel was designed to withstand weapons far more powerful than conventional Concord armaments, Captain," Warden replied. "The enemy appears to have underestimated our defensive capabilities significantly." On the Dravith flagship, Thessarian's amusement curdled into something closer to confusion as he watched his fleet's sensor readings. Impossible. Fire again. Concentrate all weapons on that single target. The second volley was heavier, more sustained, and still the Gravekeeper held, its shields glowing steadily, but never buckling. Renata felt a fierce grin spreading across her face as she watched the tactical display, watched decades of alien condescension crash uselessly against 300-year-old human engineering. "Return fire," she ordered. "Target their lead cruiser. Full spread from primary weapons." The Gravekeeper's weapons, tested only sparingly during the frantic weeks of repair, opened up in full for the first time in 3 centuries. Beams of concentrated energy, more powerful and precise than anything the human fleet had fielded before, lanced out across the void and struck the lead Dravith cruiser dead center. The enemy ship's own shields flared once, twice, and then failed entirely, the vessel breaking apart in a silent, brilliant explosion. The bridge erupted in cheers, quickly silenced by Renata's raised hand as she kept her focus on the tactical display. "Discipline," she said firmly. "This isn't over." "Julian, casualties on the station?" "Evacuation is proceeding, but slower than we'd like," Julian reported. "We've got at least another hour before the transports clear the danger zone." "Then we hold this position for an hour," Renata said. "Warden, can we keep this up?" "Shield integrity remains strong, Captain," Warden replied, "though I must note that this vessel's weapon systems are drawing power from reserves not designed for sustained combat at this intensity. I recommend careful management of our offensive capabilities to preserve long-term effectiveness." "Understood," Renata said. "Selective targeting. Take out their capital ships first. Protect the transports." For the next 40 minutes, the battle around Meridian Station raged with an intensity that stunned commanders on both sides. The Gravekeeper, once dismissed as an ancient relic unworthy of serious consideration, tore through the Dravith attack force with a precision and resilience that no one in the Varen Concord had believed possible. Ship after ship fell to its weapons, while its shields, though slowly weakening under the sustained assault, never came close to failing entirely. Elsewhere in the battle, the rest of the Sol compact fleet fought desperately, taking losses but holding their ground, buoyed by the sight of the ancient warship carving a path of destruction through the enemy formation. Admiral Okafor watched the tactical display from the Endeavour, with something like wonder in his expression. "Command," he said over the fleet-wide channel, "somebody get me eyes on that ship's combat data. I want to know exactly what Captain Cole is flying, because whatever it is, I want more of it." But not everything went perfectly. 2 hours into the engagement, as the last evacuation transports finally cleared Meridian Station's danger zone, the Osirian cruisers that had been holding back finally moved in, coordinating a precise, calculated strike against the weakened points in the human fleet's formation. 3 Sol compact ships were lost in quick succession, and Renata watched with a tightening chest as the Gravekeeper's own shield readings dropped past the 60% mark for the first time. "Captain," Julian called out, alarm clear in his voice. "We've got incoming from 3 separate vectors. The Osirian cruisers are targeting our engine section specifically. If they hit us there—" "I understand the risk, Lieutenant," Renata said, already moving to adjust their heading. "Thomas, reroute what shield power you can to the aft section." "Working on it, Captain, but we're already stretched thin," Thomas replied, his voice strained. It was in that moment, with the Gravekeeper's shields faltering under the coordinated Osirian assault, that Warden spoke again, its tone carrying something Renata hadn't heard from the ancient AI before, a note of genuine urgency. "Captain Cole, I am detecting a critical vulnerability in our current formation. I recommend an immediate tactical adjustment that falls outside standard human fleet doctrine. Do I have your authorization to take direct control of helm and weapons systems for the next 90 seconds? Renata didn't hesitate. "Do it." What followed happened faster than any human pilot could have managed alone. The Gravekeeper rolled and turned with impossible precision, weapons firing in perfectly timed sequences that intercepted incoming fire before it could connect, while simultaneously striking back at the Osirian cruisers with devastating accuracy. Within the 90 seconds Warden had requested, 2 of the 3 attacking cruisers had been disabled, their weapon systems knocked offline, while the 3rd retreated in obvious disarray. "Control returned to manual, Captain," Warden reported calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. "I apologize for the abruptness of that maneuver, but the timing margins were too narrow for verbal coordination." Renata let out a breath she'd been holding. "Remind me never to argue with you about tactics, Warden." Across the battlefield, the tide had begun to shift. With the evacuation of Meridian Station complete, and the Gravekeeper proving far more resilient and dangerous than anyone on either side had anticipated, Admiral Okafor made the call to disengage, ordering the Sol compact fleet to withdraw in good order, rather than press their luck against the still superior numbers of the Concord forces. On the Dravith flagship, High Marshal Vren Thessarian watched the human fleet retreat with a fury he could barely contain. His forces had lost 11 capital ships in the engagement, a humiliating toll inflicted largely by a single vessel his own intelligence reports had dismissed as scrap metal barely worth salvaging. "Status on that relic ship," he demanded. "Withdrawing with the rest of the human fleet, High Marshal," his tactical officer reported, clearly reluctant to deliver the news. "Our forces were unable to inflict critical damage before they disengaged." Thessarian's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. "Send a full report to the Concord High Council, and find out everything you can about that ship. Its origins, its capabilities, everything. I want answers, and I want them before we face it again." Back aboard the Gravekeeper, as the ship made its slow retreat towards Sol compact territory alongside the rest of the battered fleet, Renata finally allowed herself to sit down, exhausted, in her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew worked through post-battle checks, their earlier tension giving way to something like disbelief at what they had just accomplished. "We held," Julian said quietly, almost to himself. "We actually held against a fleet twice our size." "We did," Renata agreed. "But it cost us." "Thomas, damage report." "Shields are at 40%, and dropping without repair time," Thomas reported. "2 of our secondary weapon batteries are offline. We took a beating, Captain, even if it doesn't look like it from the outside." Renata nodded slowly, thinking about the 11 Dravith ships they'd destroyed, and the 3 Sol compact ships they'd lost. A victory, by any reasonable measure, but not a decisive one. The Concord fleet was still out there, still vastly outnumbering humanity's forces, and now they knew exactly what the Gravekeeper was capable of. They would come back better prepared next time. "Warden," she said quietly, once the rest of the bridge crew had returned to their tasks. "How much of what we just did was you? Really?" There was a pause before the AI answered. "A significant portion, Captain, particularly during the critical maneuver near the battle's end. But I want to be clear, this vessel's capabilities, formidable as they proved today, represent only a fraction of what this ship was truly designed to accomplish. What you saw today was this ship fighting a conventional battle, using conventional weapons, however advanced they may seem by current standards." Renata felt that familiar chill returning. "And the door in the ship's core? Remains sealed, Captain, and will remain so unless the conditions I described are met," Warden said. "But I feel it is my duty to inform you that today's engagement, as costly as it was for the enemy, will not be the last of its kind. Intelligence patterns suggest the Varen Concord will escalate their response significantly, now that they understand what this vessel is capable of at a conventional level." Renata looked out through the viewport at the stars streaming past as the Gravekeeper carried her crew home, victorious but scarred, and thought about the sealed door deep in the ship's core, and the weapon waiting patiently behind it. "Then we'd better be ready," she said quietly, "for whatever comes next." Behind her, unseen and unspoken, Warden processed those words carefully, running calculations that predicted, with growing certainty, exactly how much worse this war was about to become. The battle at Meridian Station changed the tone of the war overnight. What had begun as a series of border skirmishes, driven by Concord arrogance and human refusal to back down, now became something far more serious. News of the Gravekeeper's performance spread through both human and alien channels within days, and the reaction on each side could not have been more different. Among the Sol Compact, the ancient warship became a symbol of hope, a sign that humanity was not as helpless as the Concord believed. Recruitment for the fleet surged. Engineers across human space pored over what little data had been shared about the Gravekeeper's systems, hoping to reverse engineer even a fraction of its capabilities for the rest of the fleet. Renata found herself, much to her discomfort, becoming something of a public figure, her image broadcast across news channels as the captain who had stood against a Draveth armada and won. Among the Varen Concord, the reaction was colder and far more dangerous. High Marshal Vren Thessarian's humiliating losses at Meridian Station became a rallying point for the entire coalition. Species that had previously been content to let the Draveth hegemony handle the human problem now began mobilizing their own fleets, driven by a mixture of genuine alarm and wounded pride. The Osseran Directorate, cold and calculating, began a systematic analysis of every scrap of data recovered from the battle, determined to develop countermeasures. The Mur Assembly, usually content to remain diplomatic and distant, authorized the deployment of their own war fleets for the first time in over a century. "They're not just sending more ships," Julian reported to Renata 3 weeks after the battle, poring over intelligence data in the Gravekeeper's war room. "They're combining fleets, Draveth, Osseran, Mir. All 3 major Concord powers are massing at a staging point just beyond the border, in the Threshold system. Best estimates put their combined strength at over 200 capital ships." Renata stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of them settle heavily in her chest. 200 ships. The entire Sol Compact fleet, even after weeks of emergency mobilization, numbered barely 60 capital ships, most of them far less capable than even a single Concord dreadnought. "What's the target?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Command believes it's Earth," Julian said quietly. "Or at least, one of the core systems close enough to threaten it directly. They're done with border skirmishes, Captain. This looks like they're planning to end the war in one decisive strike." Renata closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of everyone she knew on Earth, everyone who had no idea that a fleet of 200 alien warships might soon be bearing down on their homeworld. When she opened them again, her expression had hardened into something resolute. "Get me Admiral Okafor," she said, "and get Warden into this conversation. We need to talk about what this ship can actually do." The strategy meeting took place aboard the Endeavour, Admiral Okafor's flagship, with representatives from across the Sol Compact's military and civilian leadership gathered in the ship's main conference room. Renata sat near the head of the table. Warden's voice piped in through a secure channel, calm and measured even as it delivered grim news. Based on current fleet strength projections, Warden explained, a direct confrontation between the Sol compact fleet and the combined Concord force at Threshold would result in near-total losses for humanity's military, even accounting for the Gravekeeper's enhanced combat capabilities. I estimate our odds of preventing a strike on core human systems, using conventional tactics, at less than 15%. The room fell into uneasy silence. Admiral Okafor rubbed his temples, looking older than Renata had ever seen him. 15% isn't a strategy, Warden. It's a death sentence for half the fleet and an open door to Earth. I am aware, Admiral, Warden replied, which is why I believe it is time to discuss the conditions under which this vessel's primary weapon system may be authorized for use. Every eye in the room turned toward the speaker on the table, and then toward Renata, who felt the weight of that attention settle heavily on her shoulders. Warden, Okafor said carefully, explain, what exactly are we talking about? There was a pause, longer than usual, as if even the ancient AI needed a moment to gather itself before what it was about to say. During the Ash Wars, humanity faced an enemy of overwhelming technological superiority, one that showed no interest in negotiation, and every intention of complete extermination. In the final years of that conflict, as human losses mounted toward the point of extinction, a coalition of the era's greatest scientists and military strategists developed a weapon of last resort. It was installed aboard this vessel, and several others like it, though the Gravekeeper is, to my knowledge, the only one to survive to the present day. What does it do? Renata asked quietly. The weapon, designated internally as the Silence Engine, generates a controlled subspace disruption of significant scale, Warden explained. In practical terms, it is capable of disabling the drive systems, weapons, and shields of every vessel within its effective radius, rendering them completely inert for a period of several hours. It does not destroy ships outright, and it causes no direct harm to living crew members. But any fleet caught within its effect becomes, for those hours, entirely defenseless. A murmur ran through the room, disbelief and dawning hope mixing together. That's, Okafor started, then stopped, shaking his head slowly. That's exactly what we'd need to counter a fleet that size. If we could disable them completely, even for a few hours. There is a significant complication, Admiral, Warden interrupted gently. The effective radius of the Silence Engine, at full power, extends across the entirety of a typical star system. It does not discriminate between combatants. Any human vessels within range at the moment of activation would also be rendered completely inert, along with every Concord ship. The room absorbed this new information in silence. Renata thought it through carefully, turning the implications over in her mind. So if we used it at Threshold, before the Concord fleet even reached our border, our own ships would need to be far enough away, or specifically shielded against the effect. Precisely, Captain, Warden confirmed. This vessel possesses internal shielding that would allow it to remain functional during activation, but no other ship in the current Sol compact fleet is equipped with comparable protection. Any human vessels present would be disabled just as thoroughly as the enemy. Okafor leaned back in his chair, thinking hard. And once disabled, what happens? The enemy fleet just sits there, helpless, for a few hours, and then everything comes back online? Correct, Admiral, Warden said. The window of vulnerability would be temporary, but absolute. Any ship you wish to destroy during that window could be destroyed with impunity. Any ship you wish to spare could be left untouched. The choice, and the moral weight of that choice, would belong entirely to the humans who make it. The implications hung heavy in the room. Renata thought of the 11 Dravith ships destroyed at Meridian Station, and multiplied that number by 20, imagining an entire fleet, helpless and unable to defend itself, at the mercy of whatever the Sol Compact decided to do. That's not a weapon, said one of the civilian council members, an older woman named Director Chen, her voice tight with unease. That's a massacre waiting to happen. It could be, Warden agreed evenly. Or it could be the reason this war ends without requiring the total destruction of either side. The choice of how to use the window of vulnerability, created by the Silence Engine, has always belonged to the humans who wielded it, not to the weapon itself. Admiral Okafor was quiet for a long moment, staring at his own hands folded on the table before him. Finally, he looked up, first at Renata, then around the room at the assembled leadership. I'm not going to pretend this is an easy decision. Using this weapon means putting the fate of 200 enemy ships and thousands of alien lives directly into our hands. But the alternative is watching our own fleet get slaughtered at threshold, and then watching Earth face a fleet we have no way to stop. He turned back to Renata. Captain Cole, this is your ship. Warden answers to your command authority. I need to know. Are you prepared to make this call, if it comes to it? Renata thought of Halverson's reach, of the families who hadn't made it out in time. She thought of the 11 Draveth ships destroyed at Meridian Station, and the 3 Sol compact ships lost in return, each one carrying people with families of their own, human and alien both. She thought about the difference between a weapon of annihilation and a weapon of mercy, and how much depended on the choices made by the people who wielded it. I need time to think this through properly, sir, she said honestly. But if it comes down to using the silence engine or watching Earth burn, then yes, I'm prepared to make that call. Okafor nodded slowly. Then let's make sure it doesn't come to that, unless we have no other choice. Warden, what would it take to safely deploy the silence engine at threshold, minimizing risk to our own forces? The Gravekeeper would need to arrive alone, without the rest of the Sol compact fleet present within the affected radius, Warden explained. This would require a diversion, drawing the primary attention of the Concord fleet elsewhere, while this vessel approaches threshold covertly and activates the weapon before the enemy fleet can disperse or retreat beyond its range. A diversion, Okafor repeated, already turning the problem over in his mind. That means risking a significant portion of the fleet as bait, keeping the Concord's attention occupied long enough for the Gravekeeper to get into position. Yes, Admiral, Warden confirmed. I estimate the diversionary force would face significant casualties in the process, though considerably fewer than a full direct engagement without the silence engine's eventual deployment. The room fell silent again, everyone present understanding the terrible calculus being laid out before them. Lives would be lost either way. The only question was how many, and whether the sacrifice would be enough to end the war before it could claim even more. I'll need volunteers, Okafor said finally, his voice heavy. Ships willing to serve as the diversionary force, knowing exactly what that might cost them. Renata stood up from her seat, her decision already made. The Gravekeeper will lead the diversion until we're close enough to break away undetected. My crew and I know this ship better than anyone else in the fleet. We can manage the approach to threshold ourselves, once we've drawn their attention. Okafor studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the risk of sending his most valuable asset directly into the heart of enemy territory. Finally, he nodded. Get your crew ready, Captain. We move in 5 days. And Renata, he paused, his expression softening slightly. Whatever happens at threshold, know that you and your crew have already given humanity something it desperately needed, hope. Don't let anyone forget that, whatever else happens. The 5 days that followed were a blur of preparation, tense and quiet aboard the Gravekeeper. Renata gathered her crew one final time before departure, standing before them in the same hangar bay, where she'd first addressed them months earlier, though the mood now was far more solemn than it had been then. I won't lie to you, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent bay. What we're about to attempt is dangerous. We're going to fly this ship alone into the heart of a Concorde staging fleet, draw their attention, then break away and activate a weapon capable of disabling every ship in that system, including potentially our own if anything goes wrong. There's no guarantee we make it back. She paused, looking out over the faces of the crew who had spent months bringing this ancient ship back to life, who had fought and bled alongside her at Meridian Station, who had trusted her with their lives even when neither of them fully understood what the Gravekeeper was truly capable of. But I also know this, she continued. Every alien commander who's laughed at this ship, who's called her a relic, a joke, a rusted piece of scrap not worth the effort, they're about to find out exactly what she was built for, and more importantly, they're going to find out what humanity is willing to do to protect what matters. Not out of hatred, and not out of cruelty, but because we have to, because the alternative is watching everyone we love burn. The hangar bay was silent for a long moment, and then Tomas stepped forward, his expression grim but resolute. We're with you, Captain. Whatever it takes. One by one, the rest of the crew echoed the sentiment, until the entire hangar bay rang, with quiet, determined agreement. Renata felt something tighten in her throat, pride and fear tangled together into something she couldn't quite name. Then let's finish what the builders of this ship started 300 years ago, she said. Prepare for departure. Threshold system. In 5 days, we end this war. As the crew dispersed to their stations, Warden's voice came through quietly, meant only for Renata to hear. Captain, I want you to know, whatever choice you face at Threshold, I trust your judgment completely. The humans who built this ship gave me one final directive above all others, one I have carried through 300 years of dormancy. What directive? Renata asked quietly. To serve, and to trust, the judgment of whoever commanded this vessel when the time came to use it, Warden said. They believed that the weapon itself was only as dangerous, or as merciful, as the person who wielded it. I have watched you command this crew for months now, Captain Cole. I believe their trust was well placed. Renata looked out through the viewport at the stars ahead, at the long, dark path leading toward Threshold and whatever waited for them there. Let's hope you're right, Warden, she said quietly. Because in 5 days, we're going to find out for certain. The Threshold system was a quiet, unremarkable stretch of space before the Concorde fleet arrived. A single yellow star, a scattering of lifeless rocky planets, and an old abandoned mining station that had been empty for decades. Now it had become the staging point for the largest military force the Varan Concorde had ever assembled against a single enemy. 211 capital ships, drawn from 3 major powers, all gathered with a single purpose: to end humanity's resistance once and for all. High Marshal Vren Thessarian stood on the command deck of his new flagship, the Reckoning's Call, watching the assembled fleet stretch out before him with grim satisfaction. The humiliation at Meridian Station still burned, but it had served its purpose, forcing the Concorde powers to finally take the human threat seriously. Now, with overwhelming numbers on his side, he intended to make sure that humiliation was never repeated. Status of the diversionary human fleet? He asked his tactical officer. 16 Sol compact ships have been detected approaching from the Corvus Corridor, High Marshal, the officer reported. Including several of their newer cruiser-class vessels, no sign of the relic ship among them. Thessarian's eyes narrowed. 16 ships, against his 211. It made no tactical sense, unless the humans were either desperate or foolish, or both. And the ancient ship? The one that gave us so much trouble at Meridian Station? No confirmed sighting, High Marshal. Long-range sensors show no trace of it in this system, or approaching from any detected vector. Keep watching, Thessarian ordered. That ship is somewhere. I want to know exactly where the moment it appears. 300 kilometers away, hidden in the sensor shadow of a small dead moon on the far side of the system, the Gravekeeper drifted in near total silence, its systems running on minimal power to avoid detection. On the bridge, Renata watched the tactical display with a tight, controlled focus, tracking the desperate, deliberately loud approach of the 16-ship diversionary fleet as it drew the attention of the massive Concorde force. They're taking the bait, Julian reported quietly. Concorde fleet is repositioning to intercept the diversion, estimated engagement in 11 minutes. Renata's jaw tightened. Those 16 ships, and the crews aboard them, were about to face a force more than 10 times their size, buying time with their lives for the Gravekeeper to complete its approach. She knew every captain in that diversionary fleet had volunteered, understanding exactly what they were risking. It didn't make the weight of it any easier to carry. Thomas, status on the Silence engine's power requirements? Reactors building toward full charge, Tomas reported from engineering, his voice tense with concentration. Warden estimates we'll be ready to activate in 14 minutes, right around the time the diversion fleet makes contact. Understood, Renata said. Warden, confirm our approach vector is still clear of enemy sensors. Confirmed, Captain, Warden replied. The Concorde fleet's full attention is currently focused on the diversionary force. Our approach remains undetected, though this window will not last indefinitely once the engagement begins in earnest. Renata watched the tactical display as the 16 human ships closed the distance with the massive Concorde fleet, weapons already charging, engines burning hot as they committed fully to the deception. She thought of the captains commanding those ships, thought of the families waiting for news back on Earth and across a dozen other human colonies, and forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Bring us around, quiet as we can manage, she ordered. We need to be in position before that engagement really gets going. The Gravekeeper slid silently from behind the dead moon, its ancient systems drawing on centuries-old stealth technology. that even Warden admitted it didn't fully understand the origins of. Slowly, carefully, the massive ship began its approach toward the heart of the threshold system, moving through the sensor shadows and gravitational disturbances of the system's outer planets, staying just beyond the edge of Concord detection. Behind them, the diversionary battle had begun in earnest. 16 Sol compact ships, badly outnumbered, fought with a desperate, focused ferocity, weaving through the massive Concord formation, striking hard and fast before retreating, forcing the enemy to spread their attention across a battlefield far larger than their numbers should have allowed. It wouldn't last. Everyone aboard the Gravekeeper knew it wouldn't last, but every minute the diversion held was a minute closer to the silence engine reaching full charge. 2 ships lost, Julian reported grimly, monitoring the distant engagement through the ship's long-range sensors. The Halcyon and the Meridian's Pride, remaining 14 ships still engaged, but taking heavy damage. Renata closed her eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the loss, then opened them again, her focus returning to the mission at hand. How close are we, Warden? 8 minutes to optimal firing position, Captain, Warden replied. Silence engine will reach full charge in approximately 6 minutes. We will have a 2-minute margin before activation. Then let's make sure that margin holds, Renata said. The final approach felt like the longest 8 minutes of Renata's life. On the tactical display, she watched the diversionary battle grow increasingly desperate, watched as 3 more human ships were destroyed or disabled, their crews sacrifice buying precious time for a mission most of them didn't even know existed. She forced herself to keep watching, refusing to look away from the cost of what they were doing, even as the Gravekeeper crept closer and closer to firing position. Position reached, Warden announced finally. Silence engine at full charge. Activation ready on your command, Captain. Renata stood from her command chair, walking slowly to the center of the bridge, looking out through the viewport at the distant, chaotic battle raging across the threshold system. 200 and some Concord ships, locked in combat, with the remnants of a desperate human diversion. Somewhere among that overwhelming force, 11 human ships and their crews were fighting for their lives, buying time with blood. Warden, she said quietly, confirm the effective radius of the silence engine, at full activation. The effect will encompass the entirety of the threshold system, Captain, including the ongoing engagement, the Concord fleet, and both remaining diversionary forces and this vessel. And our own ships out there, the diversion fleet, will they be disabled too? Yes, Captain, Warden confirmed. Along with the Concord fleet, this vessel's internal shielding will allow the Gravekeeper to remain functional, but no other ship in this system, human or Concord, will retain power once the silence engine activates. Renata nodded slowly, understanding fully now the weight of the choice before her. Activating the weapon would strand the surviving diversion fleet as helplessly as the enemy, unable to defend themselves or retreat, at least for a few hours. But it would also strip the Concord fleet of everything: weapons, shields, engines, leaving over 200 capital ships completely defenseless, entirely at the mercy of whatever the Gravekeeper chose to do next. Casualties in the diversion fleet if we wait any longer? She asked. Continuing losses at current rate, Captain. I estimate total destruction of the remaining diversionary force within 12 minutes, if the engagement continues unchanged. Renata took a slow breath, steadying herself. There was no perfect choice here, no option that avoided cost entirely. There was only the choice that ended the suffering fastest, that gave humanity the best chance at a future that didn't require endless war. Activate the silence engine, she ordered. Deep in the ship's core, behind the door that had remained sealed for 300 years, ancient systems built by humans, who had faced true extinction and refused to accept it, came fully to life for the first time since the end of the Ash Wars. Energy, gathered and focused with a precision no modern human technology could replicate, surged outward from the Gravekeeper's core in a silent, invisible wave that expanded rapidly to encompass the entirety of the threshold system. Across the battlefield, every ship, human and Concord alike, went dark simultaneously. Weapons fell silent mid-fire. Engines cut out entirely, leaving ships drifting helplessly through the void. Shields flickered and died. On the bridge of the Reckoning's Call, High Marshal Vren Thessarian watched in stunned disbelief as every system on his flagship went dark at once, emergency lighting flickering to life as the ship's main power failed completely. "What is happening?" he demanded, his voice edged with something close to panic. "Report! Someone give me a report." But no one could answer him. Every console on the bridge sat dark and unresponsive. Outside the viewport, his entire fleet drifted silently, powerless, utterly at the mercy of whatever force had just stripped them of everything. Only one ship in the entire system remained functional. The Gravekeeper, ancient and dark and massive, drifted into view from behind the debris of the battle, its own systems glowing steadily in the void, the only source of power and light among 200 helpless enemy ships and 11 battered but relieved human survivors. Renata's voice, carried across an open channel to every ship in the system, broke the stunned silence. "This is Captain Renata Cole of the Sol compact vessel Gravekeeper, broadcasting to all Concord forces in the Threshold system. Your fleet is completely disabled. Weapons, shields, engines, all offline, and will remain so for several hours. You are, entirely and completely, at our mercy." On the dark bridge of the Reckoning's call, Thessarian listened to those words with a mixture of fury and dawning horror, understanding fully now what the humans had built, what they had kept hidden for 300 years, what he had mocked and dismissed as scrap metal not worth the ice it was buried in. "We could destroy every ship in this system right now," Renata continued, her voice steady and clear. 211 Concord vessels, completely defenseless, unable to fire a single shot in their own defense. We have that power. We have earned that power, through blood and sacrifice, just as the humans who built this ship earned it 300 years ago, facing an enemy that wanted nothing less than our complete extinction. She paused, letting the weight of that threat settle across every listening channel, before continuing. "But we're not going to do that. Not because we can't, because we choose not to. Humanity did not build this weapon to become the very thing that nearly destroyed us. We built it to end wars, not to start new ones built on cruelty and revenge." On ships across the disabled Concord fleet, alien commanders listened in stunned silence, weapons crews standing helpless at dead consoles, watching through viewports as the ancient human warship they had mocked for months held their entire lives in its hands and chose mercy instead of vengeance. "High Marshal Thessarian," Renata said, her voice hardening slightly. "You attacked Halverson's Reach without warning, killed innocent colonists, and mocked this ship as unworthy of consideration. You brought 200 warships to Threshold, intending to end humanity's resistance through overwhelming force. Today, that ends. Not through your fleet's destruction, but through your fleet's complete and total defeat. I want the Varen Concord High Council to understand something very clearly. Humanity is not weak. We are not the newcomers you can push around and dismiss, and we do not want endless war any more than you claim to. But we will not be conquered, and we will not be erased. Choose peace, or face this ship again, and next time, mercy may not be on the table." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy across the Threshold system, 200 helpless Concord ships drifting powerless before a single ancient human warship that held their complete destruction in its hands and had chosen, deliberately and clearly, not to use it. The Concord High Council's surrender came 4 days later, transmitted through diplomatic channels to Sol Compact Command, with a speed that surprised even the most optimistic human negotiators. High Marshal Vren Thessarian was formally relieved of command, his career effectively ended by the humiliation of Threshold, though privately, several Concord officials admitted he had simply underestimated an enemy that deserved far more respect than he had been willing to give. The First Galactic War officially ended 11 days after the Battle of Threshold, with a formal treaty establishing new borders, new trade agreements, and for the first time, genuine diplomatic equality between the Sol Compact and the Varen Concord. Humanity, once dismissed as weak and primitive, now sat at the negotiating table as an equal, respected, and in some quarters, quietly feared power among the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Renata stood on the Gravekeeper's bridge months later, watching the ship's crew go about their duties with the easy confidence of people who had faced impossible odds, and won, not through destruction, but through restraint and courage in equal measure. Warden's presence remained steady and thoughtful as always, the ancient AI having become, in its own quiet way, as much a part of the crew as anyone else aboard. "Captain," Warden said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I have completed a full analysis of the peace treaty's terms. It appears the Varen Concord has agreed to recognize Sol Compact's sovereignty over all currently held territory, along with expanded trade rights and diplomatic representation." "That's good news," Renata said, allowing herself a rare, genuine smile. "It is," Warden agreed. "I confess, Captain, that when I was first reactivated aboard this vessel, I calculated a significant probability that humanity's current conflict would follow a similar path to the Ash Wars, escalating violence, mounting losses, until only the silence engine's activation could bring resolution, at a terrible cost. I am pleased to report that my calculations were incomplete." "How so?" Renata asked. "I did not fully account for the possibility that the humans commanding this vessel might choose mercy, even when they held absolute power to do otherwise," Warden said. "The builders of this ship hoped, I believe, that such a choice would one day be possible. I am grateful to have witnessed it." Renata looked out through the viewport at the stars stretching endlessly before her, thinking of everything the Gravekeeper had been through since that cold day on Kessa 9, when it had first been pulled from 300 years of ice and silence. A relic, once mocked and dismissed, that had become the reason an entire galactic war ended without the total destruction either side had feared. "They mocked this ship," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Called her a rusted coffin, a joke not worth the effort of digging up." "They did, Captain," Warden agreed. "They're not laughing now," Renata said, a faint, satisfied smile crossing her face as she watched the endless stars ahead, humanity's place among them finally, truly secure. Behind her, deep in the ship's ancient core, the sealed door had closed once more. The silence engine returned to dormancy, its terrible power held in careful reserve, exactly as it had been built to be. Not a weapon of endless destruction, but a final, merciful answer, waiting patiently for a war that, this time, humanity had chosen to end with wisdom rather than vengeance. The Gravekeeper sailed on, no longer a forgotten relic buried in ice, but a legend among the stars, a reminder to every species in the galaxy that humanity, once dismissed and mocked, had earned its place among the greatest powers in known space, not through cruelty, but through courage, sacrifice, and the wisdom to know the difference between strength and mercy.